The whispers cut through the ballroom like daggers as the butler exposed her forged invitation. Her heart pounded as the room turned against her. But then, the most charming duke in Europe stepped forward, took her hand, and with a glint of mischief in his eyes, whispered, "I am your escort." Why did he claim her as his own? Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Forged Invitation. The invitation mocked Beatrice from her work table, its cream vellum catching the weak afternoon light filtering through her Clerkenwell window. For 3 days, she had studied it with her illustrator's precision, the slightly inferior paper stock, the seal's barely perceptible irregularities, the calligraphy that was almost but not quite perfect. A forgery. An excellent one, but a forgery nonetheless. The Marchioness of Silverton requests the pleasure of Miss Beatrice Ashford's company at a ball to be held at Silverton House, Mayfair. Beatrice set down her pen, abandoning the half-finished hellebore illustration that was due to her publisher by week's end. The botanical drawing blurred before her eyes as she picked up the invitation again, turning it over in hands stained with India ink and plant pigments. Who would do this, and why? Still contemplating that mysterious missive, Aunt Philippa's voice drifted from the doorway. Her aunt moved slowly these days, the rheumatism worsening with each damp London winter. Once, Philippa Ashford had attended such balls regularly. Now, like Beatrice, she was invisible to the world that had once welcomed them. "It's forged, Aunt. I'm certain of it." "Then you mustn't go, my dear." Philippa settled into the worn armchair beside the fireplace, her thin hands folding in her lap. The tongue can be cruel to those who reach above their place. Whoever sent this may not have meant it kindly. Beatrice turned to the window, watching the street below where a coal seller called his wares and a maid hurried past with marketing baskets. This was her world, now respectable but faded, a gentlewoman reduced to trade, supporting herself and her ailing aunt through the precise rendering of petals and stems. 2 years since her father's investments had collapsed. 2 years since Thomas Ashford's heart had given out under the weight of his failures, leaving his daughter with nothing but debts and a keen eye for botanical detail. She had been invisible for so long. "Perhaps," Beatrice said quietly, "but I've been a ghost in this city, Aunt. Just once. I want to see that world again. I'll be careful. I'll leave before midnight, like a proper Cinderella." The memory surfaced unbidden, 3 years ago, before the ruin, at a modest ball in Bloomsbury. She had stepped away to examine a painting when she overheard Lady Arabella Thornfield's crystalline laugh. "Did you see the Weatherby girl trying to secure an introduction to Lord Hastings? Poor relations should know better than to reach above their station. It's embarrassing for everyone." Even then, Beatrice had recognized the cruelty beneath the elegance. But she had also recognized something else, the intoxicating beauty of that glittering world, the way candlelight transformed ordinary people into something magnificent, the possibility that existed in those perfumed halls. "If you're determined," Aunt Philippa said softly, "you may borrow my seafoam silk. It's outdated, but the fabric is still sound." The gown was beautiful. Beatrice's skilled fingers had altered the waist, updated the sleeves, added a modest trim of ribbon that made it almost current. Almost, but standing before the spotted mirror in their small bedchamber, she looked like a woman who belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere existed only in her imagination. The hired hackney deposited her a block from Silverton House. She couldn't risk the humiliation of arriving in such a shabby conveyance. Better to walk the final distance in her borrowed evening slippers, clutching her reticule and the forged invitation like talismans against disaster. Silverton House blazed with light. 1,000 candles reflected in crystal chandeliers, their brilliance spilling from tall windows onto the Mayfair street. Carriages lined the square, disgorging ladies in jewel-toned silks and gentlemen in immaculate evening dress. The scent of hothouse roses drifted through the open doors, mingling with expensive perfumes and the warm smell of beeswax candles. Beatrice's heart hammered as she presented her invitation to the footman at the entrance. He barely glanced at it before stepping aside, and suddenly she was inside, surrounded by marble and gilt and the swelling strains of a waltz echoing through impossible spaces. She had forgotten how beautiful it was, how the rustle of silk and satin created its own music, how the candlelight transformed faces into works of art, how the very air seemed to shimmer with possibility and privilege. Stay at the periphery, she told herself. Observe. Don't engage. Leave before anyone notices. She drifted toward the gallery where paintings lined the walls, magnificent portraits and landscapes that gave her an excuse to avoid the dance floor. Her artist's eye catalogued details. A Gainsborough, possibly authentic. A botanical study that was certainly Dutch, 17th century. She was examining the brushwork on a still life when she heard her name. I'm quite certain that's Beatrice Ashford. Lady Arabella Thornfield's voice carried the same crystalline quality Beatrice remembered, sharp enough to cut. Her family lost everything. I heard she works for money, now actually works. How did she possibly secure an invitation? Beatrice's blood turned to ice. Indeed, the Marchioness of Silverton's tone was curious rather than shocked. How extraordinary. Perhaps we should inquire, Arabella suggested, and there was something in her voice, a satisfaction that made Beatrice's stomach clench. The Marchioness summoned her butler with a gesture. The man approached Beatrice with the inexorable certainty of doom. Excuse me, miss. His voice was polite but carried enough volume to draw attention. Might I see your invitation? The conversations around her didn't stop entirely, but they faltered. Dancers continued their patterns, but heads turned. Lorgnettes lifted. The circle of social judgment contracted around her like a noose. Beatrice's hands trembled as she produced the invitation. The butler examined it with professional thoroughness, and she watched his expression shift from courtesy to suspicion to cold disapproval. Madam, he announced, his voice now loud enough to reach the nearby guests, this invitation is not authentic. The seal is forged. The words fell like stones into water, ripples of whispers spreading outward. Beatrice's face burned with shame, so intense it felt physical, but she forced herself to stand straight. She would not cower. She would not give them that satisfaction. How absolutely dreadful, Lady Arabella's voice cut through the murmurs. To think someone would stoop to forgery to infiltrate polite society. Beatrice opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, to flee with whatever scraps of dignity she could salvage, and then the crowd parted. He moved through the ballroom with the kind of presence that made people yield space without conscious thought. Tall, dark-haired, with aristocratic features that seemed carved from marble and eyes the color of winter storms. Maximilian Rutherford, Duke of Ashbourne. She recognized him from engravings, but no illustration had captured the cool confidence that surrounded him like armor, or the subtle danger in his carefully controlled movements. He had been watching from the card-room doorway when the exposure began. Something about the young woman's dignified bearing in the face of public humiliation had caught his attention, the way she refused to crumble, the pride that kept her spine straight even as her face burned with shame. "I beg your pardon," he said, his cultured voice carrying an undercurrent of amusement that made several guests exchange startled glances. "But there seems to be some confusion." He reached Beatrice's side and extended his hand. His grey eyes met hers with an expression she couldn't decipher, calculation mixed with something that might have been curiosity or challenge, or both. "I am your escort, Miss Ashford. I sent the invitation myself. My secretary must have neglected to inform Lady Silverton's staff of the addition to the guest list." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Europe's most eligible bachelor, the Duke, who had dodged matrimonial schemes for a decade, claiming this disgraced interloper as his guest. Beatrice saw Lady Arabella's face go white, then flood with color, saw the Marchioness's eyebrows lift in startled speculation, saw 100 faces turn toward her, with expressions ranging from shock to fascination to barely concealed envy. The Duke's hand remained extended, steady as stone. His expression betrayed nothing but polite expectation, yet there was something in his eyes, a test, perhaps, or an offer whose terms she couldn't begin to guess. Beatrice's mind raced. This was impossible. He was lying. But why? What possible reason could the Duke of Ashbourne have for claiming her as his guest? His hand didn't waver. The room held its breath. She recognized her only lifeline and placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, real, and something shifted in the ballroom's atmosphere. The judgment didn't disappear, but it redirected, channeled into a different kind of speculation. "Shall we dance?" The Duke's tone made it clear this was not truly a question. Beatrice nodded, not trusting her voice, and let him lead her toward the dance floor as the orchestra began a new waltz, and the ton erupted into fevered whispers behind them. Chapter 2. The Duke's Dangerous Gambit. His hand was warm against hers, steady and sure as he guided her into the waltz. Maximilian Rutherford danced the way he seemed to do everything with effortless precision that suggested years of training so thorough it had become instinct. Beatrice struggled to follow his lead, hyper-aware of every eye fixed upon them, of the whispers that followed in their wake, like ripples behind a ship. The dance floor cleared slightly around them, whether from respect for the Duke's rank or from a desire to watch this extraordinary spectacle, she couldn't determine. Lady Arabella's face was a mask of barely controlled fury at the edge of her vision, but Beatrice forced herself to focus on the steps, on not disgracing herself further by stumbling over her borrowed slippers. "You're wondering why I intervened?" The Duke's voice was quiet, pitched for her ears alone, beneath the orchestra's swelling melody. Beatrice found her voice, though it emerged less steady than she would have wished. "The thought had crossed my mind, Your Grace, along with wondering what price I'll be expected to pay for your gallantry." His eyebrow lifted a subtle movement that suggested surprise. Clearly, he was unaccustomed to such directness from young ladies. "You think I have ulterior motives? I think dukes don't rescue disgraced strangers without reason." The words came easier now, her natural honesty overriding her fear. "I also think I should have left well enough alone and never come here." "But you did come." His grey eyes studied her with genuine curiosity rather than mockery. "Why?" Beatrice hesitated. She could lie, offer some acceptable fiction about confusion or innocence, but something in his direct gaze suggested he would see through pretense, and she was tired of performing. "Because someone sent me that forged invitation, and I was foolish enough to want one night of beauty before returning to my real life. I knew it was likely a trap or a cruel joke, but I came anyway." His expression shifted, and she caught a flicker of what might have been respect in those winter storm eyes. "Knowing it was forged, that's either remarkably brave or remarkably stupid. The line between the two is often quite thin, I've found." A smile touched the corner of his mouth, brief but genuine. He guided her through a turn, his hand firm at her waist, and she noticed how other dancers adjusted their patterns to accommodate them, how conversations paused as they passed. The Duke of Ashbourne commanded space without demanding it, his presence alone enough to reshape the room's social geometry. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Ashford." He nodded to an elderly earl as they swept past, maintaining the performance that everything was perfectly ordinary. "Your family, your circumstances. There's little to tell that you haven't already guessed, Your Grace. My father was Thomas Ashford of Hampshire. His investments failed. He died. I live with my aunt in Clerkenwell and support us both through botanical illustration for a publisher." She met his eyes. "Not the sort of background typically of interest to dukes. Yet here we are." His tone was thoughtful. "Botanical illustration. That's unusual work for a gentlewoman. Necessity makes many things usual that were once unthinkable." She was studying him as they danced, her artist's eye cataloguing details. The tension in his jaw when an older gentleman across the room gave him a significant look. The way his smile, though perfectly executed, didn't quite reach his eyes when a young lady and her mother attempted to catch his attention. The careful control in every movement, as though he conducted his entire life as a performance for an ever-present audience. They danced past Lady Arabella, who had positioned herself conspicuously near the floor's edge. "Your Grace," she called, her voice honey-sweet. "I'm certain this is all a misunderstanding." "But—" "No misunderstanding, Lady Arabella." Maximilian's interruption was smooth as silk and sharp as a blade. "Miss Ashford is here at my invitation. I trust that settles the matter." Arabella's curtsy was perfect, but Beatrice caught the fury blazing in her eyes. "Of course, Your Grace." As they swept away, Beatrice whispered, "You've made an enemy there." Lady Arabella was never a friend, merely an assumption. His tone held a hint of weariness. "Society assumes many things about what I should want. I find their assumptions tedious." The waltz concluded, and before Beatrice could determine how to extricate herself from this impossible situation, a young woman approached them. She was perhaps 20, with warm brown eyes and a friendly smile that seemed genuine rather than calculated. "Max, aren't you going to introduce me?" The woman's tone held affectionate exasperation. "Beatrice, may I present my sister, Lady Caroline Rutherford. Caroline, Miss Beatrice Ashford." Caroline's curtsy was brief and informal. "Miss Ashford, I'm delighted to meet you. My brother rarely brings guests to my attention, so you must be particularly interesting." Before Beatrice could formulate a response, Maximilian excused himself to speak with a gentleman who had been attempting to catch his eye. Caroline immediately linked arms with Beatrice, drawing her toward the refreshment tables with conspiratorial closeness. "My brother never does anything without purpose," Caroline whispered. "I'm fascinated to discover what his purpose is with you. I'm rather wondering that myself, Lady Caroline." "Oh, call me Caroline, please. If Max has claimed you as his guest, we needn't stand on such ceremony." She handed Beatrice a glass of champagne. "Tell me, did you truly forge an invitation, or was that horrid butler mistaken?" Beatrice's instinct was to dissemble, but Caroline's open curiosity seemed free of judgment. "The invitation was forged. Though I didn't forge it myself, it was sent to me. I was foolish enough to use it." "How wonderfully bold!" Caroline's eyes sparkled. "I wish I had your courage. I've never done anything even slightly scandalous in my entire life." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of an imposing woman in deep purple silk, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure that added inches to her already considerable height. Beatrice recognized her instantly from the portrait in the gallery, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, Maximilian's mother. "Caroline, introduce me." The Dowager's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Mama, this is Miss Beatrice Ashford. Miss Ashford, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne." Beatrice sank into her deepest curtsy, her heart hammering. "Your Grace." The Dowager's sharp blue eyes examined her with the thoroughness of a general surveying a battlefield. "Ashford, related to Thomas Ashford of Hampshire, his daughter, Your Grace." "I see." The Dowager's expression revealed nothing. "Your father made unfortunate investments. I recall." The words might have been cruel, but they were delivered with such factual precision that Beatrice could detect no malice. "Yes, Your Grace. And now you work for your living." "Not a question." "Yes, Your Grace. I illustrate botanical specimens for Thornbury and Sons, publishers." The Dowager was silent for a long moment, her gaze never wavering. Then she nodded once, decisively. "You carry yourself well, considering the circumstances. Come, Caroline. We should greet Lady Marshfield before she takes offense at being ignored." As they swept away, Beatrice released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had been examined, evaluated, and if she read that final nod correctly, provisionally approved, though for what purpose, she couldn't imagine. Maximilian materialized at her elbow. "I see you've survived my mother. Well done. Is that what that was?" I felt rather like a horse being assessed at Tattersall's. His laugh was genuine this time, unguarded. "An apt comparison. My mother rarely does anything without thorough evaluation." "Your Grace," a gentleman's voice interrupted. Beatrice turned to see an older man, prosperous-looking, with the careful grooming of wealth and the shrewd eyes of commerce. "Might I have a word about the factory matter?" Maximilian's expression smoothed into diplomatic neutrality. "Of course, Pemberton. Miss Ashford, would you excuse me for a moment?" But Lord Pemberton gestured for her to remain. "No need for the lady to leave. This won't take but a moment." He turned to Maximilian. "The mill owners are counting on your support, Ashbourne. Your father always understood business realities." "My father had his perspectives, I have mine." Maximilian's tone was pleasant but firm. "I'm still reviewing the proposals. The vote is next month. We need to know where you stand." "Then you'll know when I cast my vote, Pemberton. I prefer to examine all factors before committing my position." The older man's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course, Your Grace. I trust you'll consider the broader implications. Good evening, Miss Ashford." As Pemberton departed, Beatrice studied Maximilian with renewed curiosity. Factory conditions? A proposed reform bill? Regulations on working hours, safety measures, minimum wages? His tone was carefully neutral. "It's proving contentious. I imagine the mill owners object to anything that might reduce their profits." He glanced at her sharply. "You have opinions on industrial reform?" "I have experience with poverty, Your Grace. That tends to clarify one's perspective on labor conditions." Something shifted in his expression, interest, perhaps, or reassessment. "The evening is growing warm. Would you care for some air?" The terrace stretched along the ballroom's eastern side, gas lamps illuminating manicured hedges and gravel paths that disappeared into the darkness of the garden beyond. The night air was cool against Beatrice's heated skin, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the faint sound of the orchestra through the open doors. Maximilian led her to the balustrade, far enough from other guests seeking respite to afford privacy. His demeanor shifted, the public performance sliding away to reveal something more genuine beneath. "I should explain myself," he said quietly. "You deserve that much, at least." Beatrice gripped the stone balustrade, steeling herself for whatever revelation was coming. "I'm listening. I didn't send that invitation, but I watched you enter the ballroom tonight. I noticed how you studied the paintings rather than seeking attention, how your eyes catalogued details with professional precision." He paused. "When that butler announced the forgery, I recognized what was happening. Lady Arabella's satisfaction was too perfect. She orchestrated your humiliation. Why did you intervene then? Partly impulse, partly because Lady Arabella's enjoyment of your humiliation irritated me." He turned to face her fully. "Partly because you didn't beg or make excuses. You stood there prepared to face the consequences of your choice with dignity and tact. That's rare. And now I'm in your debt." Beatrice forced herself to meet his eyes. "Which I suspect you're accustomed to people being." "I'm accustomed to people wanting to be in my debt." "You seem decidedly uncomfortable with it." His mouth quirked. "That's also rare. I've learned that debts always come due, Your Grace, usually at the worst possible moment." "Maximilian." The correction was quiet. "When we're private, at least." The intimacy of his given name felt dangerous on her tongue, but she nodded. "Then you should call me Beatrice." "Beatrice." He tested the name, and she tried not to notice how it sounded in his cultured voice. "Tell me honestly, who sent you that invitation? Do you have enemies who would wish to humiliate you?" "I have no enemies. I have no position or fortune worth anyone's malicious attention." She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Though I suspect Lady Arabella may have arranged it." Her family crest, a thornbird, was sketched in the corner of the envelope. Barely visible, but it was there. Maximilian's expression darkened. "Arabella has expectations regarding my future that I've never encouraged. This seems vindictive even for her. Yet someone thought me worth the effort of forgery and orchestration," Beatrice observed. "I'm still trying to understand why." They were silent for a moment, the night air stirring the leaves in the garden below. Maximilian studied her with an intensity that made her aware of every detail: the slightly outdated cut of her borrowed gown, the ink stains she hadn't quite scrubbed from her fingers, the way her hair was already escaping its pins. "Have you read Thornbury's treatise on agricultural reform?" he asked suddenly. The change of subject startled her. "The one published last month?" "Yes. His proposals for crop rotation and tenant rights are revolutionary, though I suspect landowners will resist implementation. I found his arguments compelling, particularly regarding long-term soil preservation." Maximilian's eyes held genuine interest now, though he underestimates the initial capital investment required. They fell into discussion, and Beatrice felt herself relaxing despite the impossibility of the situation. He was intelligent, truly intelligent, not merely educated, with a mind that engaged with ideas rather than accepting them uncritically. She found herself arguing points she'd only considered privately, her animation growing as he challenged and questioned, and occasionally agreed with surprising passion. "You think deeply about these matters," Maximilian observed. "That's unexpected. Because I'm a woman? Or because I'm poor? Because most people in my circle think about nothing more substantial than fashion and scandal." He stepped closer. "You're different." A strand of hair had fallen across her face, and before she could tuck it away, Maximilian reached out. His fingers brushed her cheek as he guided the errant curl behind her ear, and the touch lingered a moment too long. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Beatrice couldn't name but recognized as dangerous. Voices approached from inside, other guests seeking garden air, and they stepped apart hastily. Maximilian's expression returned to careful neutrality, but Beatrice's heart was racing. "May I call on you, Miss Ashford?" His tone was formal again, but his eyes held a question that went deeper than the words. "Properly, this time." Beatrice hesitated, every practical instinct screaming that she should refuse. "I live in Clerkenwell, Your Grace. It's not the sort of neighborhood where ducal carriages typically appear. I'm not the sort of woman dukes typically call upon. Perhaps that's precisely why I wish to." The other guests emerged onto the terrace, and the moment shattered. Maximilian offered his arm to escort her back inside, but before they reached the doors, Beatrice whispered, "Why are you doing this? Truly?" He was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then, "Because I'm tired of appropriate. Because you looked at those paintings the way I wish I could look at my life, with genuine appreciation rather than obligatory assessment. Because when you stood there facing humiliation, You reminded me that courage exists outside ballrooms and battlefields. He met her eyes. And because I haven't had a conversation this interesting in 3 years, it wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise. But it was honest, and honesty was something Beatrice understood. You may call, she said quietly, though I make no promises about what that might mean. I would expect nothing less. As they re-entered the ballroom, Beatrice caught Lady Arabella's gaze across the room. The fury there was unmistakable, and Beatrice felt a chill of foreboding. Whatever had begun tonight, it was far from finished. But Maximilian's hand remained steady at her elbow, and for the first time in 2 years, Beatrice Ashford felt visible. Chapter 3. Consequences and Mysteries. The morning light through Beatrice's attic studio window was perfect, clear northern illumination that revealed every detail without casting harsh shadows. It was the light she needed for the delicate work of botanical illustration, for capturing the precise curve of a petal or the subtle variations in a leaf's veining. Yet she had been staring at the same half-finished hellebore for an hour, her pen motionless above the paper, her mind anywhere but on the purple-tinged blooms before her. The ball, the exposure, the Duke's hand extended like salvation, the way his fingers had lingered against her cheek on the terrace. She set down her pen with more force than necessary, spattering ink across the work table. The hellebore illustration was due to Thornbury and Sons by Friday. Mr. Thornbury was a patient employer, but patience had limits, and Beatrice could not afford to lose this commission. She and Aunt Philippa depended on the steady trickle of guineas her work provided. "My dear, you have a visitor." Aunt Philippa's voice preceded her up the narrow stairs, slightly breathless from the climb. She appeared in the doorway bearing a tea tray and an armful of newspapers, her expression hovering between amusement and concern. "Actually, you've had 3 visitors this morning, which is 3 more than usual." Beatrice took the tea gratefully. "Who would possibly call on us?" "Mrs. Hartley from number 12. Philippa's tone was dry. "The same Mrs. Hartley who has cut us dead in the street for the past year. Suddenly she's desperately interested in discussing neighborhood charity work and happened to mention, quite casually, that she heard you attended the Silverton Ball last evening." "What did you tell her?" "That you were indisposed and could not receive callers, which is true. You're clearly in no state to face the world." Philippa set down the newspapers. "Though you'll have to face these eventually." The headlines screamed across the society pages in bold typeface. "The Duke's surprising choice. Ashbourne claims mystery companion. Who is the mystery lady of last evening? Society speculates on His Grace's unexpected guest. A romance blooms, the Duke of Ashbourne, and an unknown beauty." Beatrice's hands trembled as she unfolded the papers. The accounts were breathless and speculative, full of phrases like mysterious origins and unconventional selection and shocking deviation from expectation. Her name appeared in some columns. Clearly someone had identified her, while others left her anonymous, referring only to a lady of genteel but reduced circumstances. "They make it sound like a fairy tale," Beatrice murmured. "Or a scandal. I can't determine which. Perhaps both." Philippa settled into the room's single armchair. "What happened, my dear?" "The truth now." Beatrice told her everything: the exposure, the Duke's intervention, their conversation on the terrace, his request to call. When she finished, Philippa was quiet for a long moment. "He will call, you know," the older woman said finally. "Men like the Duke don't make empty promises. The question is, what you'll do when he arrives." "I don't know." Beatrice turned back to her work table, but her eyes caught on the envelope that still lay beside her inkwell, the forged invitation that had begun everything. She picked it up, studying it with fresh attention. Her magnifying glass revealed what casual inspection had missed there. In the corner of the envelope, nearly invisible against the cream paper, was a tiny sketch. A bird with elaborate tail feathers, executed with expert precision. A thornbird, Lady Arabella Thornfield's family symbol. She sent it. The words emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Lady Arabella sent me that invitation knowing exactly what would happen. She orchestrated my humiliation." "But why?" Philippa leaned forward. "You have no connection to her, no rivalry over the Duke. You didn't even know him." Beatrice's mind raced, connecting fragments. Perhaps she heard something, some mention of me, however small. Perhaps the Duke once remarked on botanical illustrations he'd seen published under my name, and Arabella perceived even that tiny attention as competition to be eliminated. That's calculated cruelty. That's desperation. Beatrice set down the envelope, her hands steady now despite the anger building in her chest. She saw me as a threat before I even knew the Duke existed. Across London, in Grosvenor Square, Maximilian Rutherford sat in his study at Ashbourne House, attempting to focus on the estate reports before him. The morning light illuminated oak-panelled walls lined with books, maps of his various properties, and the accumulated weight of generations of ducal responsibility. He had read the same paragraph 3 times and absorbed nothing. "Your Grace." Mr. Edwards, his secretary, appeared in the doorway with his usual quiet efficiency. The man was 40, precise, and possessed of an ability to uncover information that bordered on supernatural. "I have the information you requested regarding Miss Ashford." Maximilian set aside the reports with barely concealed relief. "What did you discover?" Edwards consulted his notes. "Miss Beatrice Ashford, 25, only child of Thomas Ashford of Hampshire. Her father's investments failed 2 years ago, not through poor judgment, as commonly believed, but through deliberate sabotage by business rivals. The details are murky, but it appears Mr. Ashford was maneuvered into a fraudulent scheme by men who sought to acquire his properties at reduced prices. He lost everything? Everything save a modest trust for Miss Ashford's education, which had been established by her maternal grandmother. That trust was exhausted within 6 months of Mr. Ashford's death. Since then, Miss Ashford has supported herself and her aunt through botanical illustration work for Thornbury and Sons, among other publishers. Edwards looked up. "She's known in publishing circles as exceptionally talented. Mr. Thornbury speaks of her in terms usually reserved for established masters. However, she struggles financially. Illustration work pays poorly unless one achieves significant reputation." Maximilian absorbed this information in silence. The picture it painted was both what he'd suspected and worse than he'd imagined. Beatrice Ashford wasn't merely reduced circumstances, she was one step from destitution, clinging to gentility through sheer determination and skill. "Thank you, Edwards. That will be all." After the secretary departed, Maximilian rose and moved to the window overlooking the square. He had spent a sleepless night thinking about Beatrice, her directness, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she had refused to grovel when exposed. In a world of calculated charm and strategic marriages, she had been refreshingly, dangerously honest. "You're brooding, Lord." James Hartwick's voice interrupted his thoughts. James entered without knocking, as was his privilege as Maximilian's closest friend since Cambridge. Always a concerning sign. "I'm thinking about the mysterious Miss Ashford, no doubt." James sprawled in the leather chair before the desk. "You've created quite the sensation. Society is in an uproar. You've been dodging Arabella Thornfield's matrimonial ambitions for 3 seasons. Now you publicly claim a penniless illustrator? People think you've either gone mad or are conducting a very elaborate revenge on Arabella for her presumption. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. I haven't decided yet." "Have you considered," James said carefully, "that this could damage your political standing? Pemberton and his mill-owner allies already view you as dangerously sympathetic to reform. Adding a bride of inappropriate origins would confirm their worst suspicions." "I haven't proposed marriage." Maximilian's tone was sharper than intended. "Not yet, but you're thinking about it. I know that look." Was he? Maximilian turned the question over in his mind. He barely knew Beatrice Ashford. One evening, one conversation, one moment of unexpected connection. Yet he couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she'd stood proud despite humiliation, her refusal to dissemble, the passion in her voice when they discussed agricultural reform. She didn't simper or manipulate. She didn't want his title or fortune. She simply was. "I'm calling on her this afternoon," he said finally. "Beyond that, I make no predictions." James sighed. "At least tell me you're being careful. Whatever Arabella intended with that forged invitation, she won't appreciate your interest in Miss Ashford. Arabella's expectations are not my concern. They are, when she makes them, everyone else's concern." The Duke's carriage arrived in Clerkenwell at precisely 2 o'clock, causing exactly the sensation Beatrice had predicted. Faces appeared in windows. Children stopped their games to stare. Mrs. Hartley emerged from her door with transparent casualness, clearly hoping to witness the Duke's arrival. Beatrice watched from her window as Maximilian descended from the carriage with unconscious grace, his dark coat perfectly tailored, his bearing that of a man accustomed to command. The contrast between his elegance and the modest street was jarring, yet he navigated it without visible condescension, nodding politely to the curious onlookers as he approached their door. "Courage, my dear." Aunt Philippa squeezed Beatrice's hand. "Remember that you have nothing to apologize for." They received him in the small sitting room, shabby but clean, the furniture worn but well maintained. Aunt Philippa greeted the Duke with the dignity of her breeding, her spine straight despite her illness. "Your Grace, welcome to our home." She gestured to the settee. "I hope you understand that my niece is under my protection, limited as my resources may be. If your intentions are not honorable, I respect your directness, madam." Maximilian's tone held genuine warmth. "I assure you I mean your niece no harm. I simply wish to further our acquaintance." Beatrice entered then, having deliberately chosen to receive him in her day dress, plain, sprigged muslin with no pretensions to fashion. If he was calling on her, he would see her as she truly was, not dressed in borrowed elegance. His eyes met hers, and something shifted in his expression, approval, perhaps, or understanding. "Miss Ashford, thank you for receiving me." They sat, Aunt Philippa positioning herself as chaperone with clear intent. The conversation began formally inquiries about health, weather, the usual social pleasantries, but gradually it deepened, finding the rhythm of genuine exchange they'd discovered on the terrace. "I have a confession," Maximilian said after several minutes. "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding agricultural reform. You mentioned tenant rights. I'd be interested in your perspective on the specific proposals in Thornbury's treatise." And they were off, discussing crop rotation and land management, the balance between profit and sustainability, the moral obligations of landowners to those who worked their soil. Aunt Philippa watched with barely concealed astonishment as her niece argued points of political economy with the Duke of Ashbourne. Finally, Maximilian shifted to the purpose of his visit. "I'm hosting a garden party at Ashbourne Park in Richmond this Saturday. I would be honored if you and your aunt would attend." Beatrice met his eyes directly. "I know who sent the invitation, Your Grace. I believe Lady Arabella Thornfield intended my humiliation. I need to know, was she acting out of general malice, or because I represent some threat to expectations regarding you?" His surprise was visible. "You deduced that?" Her family symbol was sketched on the envelope, barely visible, but there. Beatrice's voice was steady. "So I'll ask again, what expectations exist between you and Lady Arabella?" Maximilian's jaw tightened. "Lady Arabella has expectations that I have never encouraged. My mother and hers have been friends since childhood. There has been an assumption in certain circles that we would eventually marry, but assumptions are not commitments. I have made Lady Arabella no promises. Yet you used me as a shield against those assumptions." Beatrice leaned forward. "I should be angry, but I suspect I benefited as much as you from that intervention, so perhaps we're even. Perhaps we both escaped something last night." His grey eyes held hers. "The question is, what we do now?" The tension in the room was palpable. Aunt Philippa cleared her throat delicately. "Will you attend the garden party?" Maximilian's voice was careful, but Beatrice heard the question beneath the question. She hesitated. "Your Grace, you must understand what you're asking. If I attend, society will speculate further. Lady Arabella will be there, presumably. Your mother. People who will judge me, find me wanting, whisper about my unsuitability." "Yes," he agreed quietly. "They will, but I'm asking anyway." Beatrice glanced at Aunt Philippa, who gave the smallest of nods. "Then we accept. Though I make no promises about what that acceptance might mean, I would expect nothing less." After the Duke departed, Aunt Philippa sagged into her chair. "Well, that was extraordinary. It was terrifying. It was both." The older woman studied her niece. "He's sincere, Beatrice. Whatever his initial motivations, his interest now seems genuine. But you must be careful. The higher you climb in that world, the farther you have to fall." An hour later, a note arrived. Unsigned, but the handwriting was educated and feminine. "You are playing a game you cannot win. The Duke may find you an amusing diversion, but men of his position marry women of consequence. Enjoy your moment of notoriety before you return to the obscurity you deserve." Beatrice read it twice, her hands steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. She had survived her father's death, survived poverty, survived 2 years of grueling work to keep herself and her aunt from destitution. Lady Arabella's threats, however elegantly phrased, were nothing compared to actual hunger, actual loss, but they were still frightening. "What is it?" Aunt Philippa asked. "A warning from Lady Arabella, I assume." Beatrice folded the note carefully. "She's trying to frighten me away." "And? Are you frightened?" "Yes," Beatrice met her aunt's eyes. "But I'm also angry, and I'm tired of hiding." That evening, she stood before her small mirror, trying on the one good day dress she owned that might be appropriate for a garden party. Sprigged muslin, simple but becoming, with careful mending at the seams where it had begun to fray. She looked like what she was, a gentlewoman of reduced circumstances, out of place in a duke's world, but she looked like herself. "I'll attend his garden party," she said aloud, her reflection staring back with determination. "I'll bring my sketchpad. I'll be exactly who I am, not some pale imitation of a society lady. If Maximilian Rutherford wants to know me, he'll know the truth." Aunt Philippa appeared behind her, resting gentle hands on her shoulders. "That takes more courage than you know, my dear." "I know." Beatrice's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. But don't let fear become paralysis." Philippa's reflection smiled. "After all, you've already crashed one ball. How much more dangerous can a garden party be?" Beatrice laughed despite herself. But as she prepared for bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping onto a battlefield where the weapons were whispers and the wounds invisible, but potentially fatal. Lady Arabella's warning echoed in her mind. "You are playing a game you cannot win." Perhaps not. But Beatrice had learned something in 2 years of poverty that Arabella, for all her aristocratic training, had never discovered. Sometimes survival itself was victory enough. Chapter 4. The Garden Party and Growing Connection. Ashbourne Park sprawled across Richmond's hills like something from a pastoral painting, ancient oaks casting dappled shadows over manicured lawns, formal gardens descending in careful terraces toward the distant glimmer of the Thames. Beatrice pressed her face closer to the hired carriage window as they approached, her breath catching at the sheer beauty of it. This wasn't merely wealth, this was generations of wealth, centuries of accumulated privilege transformed into landscape. She had refused Maximilian's offer to send his carriage. It was a small assertion of independence, perhaps foolish given her circumstances, but necessary. If she was entering his world, she would do so on her own terms, however modest those terms might be. The carriage deposited her at the circular drive where other guests were arriving, fewer than she'd expected. Perhaps 20 people, their dress suggesting careful curation, ladies in elegant but not ostentatious gowns, gentlemen in country attire that still managed to proclaim their status. And there, descending from an elaborate barouche, was Lady Arabella Thornfield and her mother, both dressed in summer silks that put Beatrice's simple sprigged muslin to shame. Arabella's gaze found Beatrice immediately, her expression freezing into something that might have been a smile if smiles could draw blood. "Miss Ashford." Caroline Rutherford appeared at Beatrice's elbow like a guardian angel, linking arms with easy familiarity. "I'm so glad you came. Let me rescue you from the gauntlet of arrival. We'll take the garden path much more pleasant than making formal greetings." Caroline steered her away from the main entrance, down a flagstone path bordered by lavender that released its scent as their skirts brushed the purple spikes. "My brother is legendarily cautious," Caroline said without preamble. "He's had heiresses, beauties, and accomplished ladies pursue him for years with every manner of scheme and stratagem. You're the first person I've seen him actively pursue. I'm desperately curious why." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not certain he is pursuing me, Lady Caroline. It may be I'm simply a convenient rebellion against expectations." Caroline's laugh was genuine and delighted. "If you believe that, you haven't noticed how he watches you. I've known my brother for 20 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you at the Silverton ball. Perhaps he's merely—" "No." Caroline squeezed her arm gently. "Max doesn't do anything merely. If he's invited you here, introduced you to his friends and political allies, brought you to Ashbourne Park itself, he's serious. The question is whether you're prepared for what that means." Before Beatrice could formulate a response, they emerged into the main garden where guests had scattered across the lawn. A croquet game was in progress, ladies shrieking with theatrical delight as gentlemen adjusted their aim. Conversations clustered near refreshment tables laden with fruit, cakes, and cool drinks. It was elegant, relaxed, and utterly foreign to Beatrice's experience. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "Neither did I, originally." Caroline's tone was matter-of-fact. "I married into this. My father was a gentleman, but hardly of the first rank. The Dowager Duchess was horrified until she realized I had no interest in changing Max or trying to control him. Then she decided I was acceptable. She gestured toward a bench near a magnificent climbing rose. Go. Do what you do best. Show them who you are. Beatrice settled on the bench, grateful for the permission to retreat from direct social engagement. She extracted her sketch pad from her reticule. She'd brought it deliberately. Armor against awkwardness. The climbing rose beside her was extraordinary. Deep crimson blooms with at least 40 petals each, the stems thick with age, the growth pattern suggesting careful cultivation over decades. Her pen moved across the paper with the precision of practice, capturing the exact curl of a petal, the precise angle of a thorn, the way light caught the waxy surface of the leaves. The familiar work steadied her, creating a small circle of competence in an overwhelming environment. I say, that's remarkable. A gentleman's voice interrupted her concentration. She looked up to find several guests had gathered, watching her work with various expressions of interest. Lord Pemberton, the mill owner from the Silverton Ball, leaned closer to examine her sketch. You have remarkable talent, Miss Ashford. This precision you've been properly trained. Self-trained, my lord, with guidance from published works. Beatrice kept her voice steady. Necessity is an excellent teacher. Extraordinary. An older woman, Lady something. Beatrice hadn't caught the name, peered at the drawing. Though I suppose working for trade does give one practical skills. The comment hung in the air, pointed despite its pleasant delivery. Beatrice felt the judgment implicit in those words. Working for trade, rather than pursuing art as an accomplishment, marked her as irredeemably outside their circle. Indeed, Lady Arabella's voice cut through the murmurs. She had appeared at the edge of the group, her expression one of calculated sympathy. It's quite admirable how Miss Ashford has adapted to her circumstances. Of course, artistic hobbies are charming, but they're quite different from the proper accomplishments required of. Miss Ashford's illustrations appear in botanical texts used at Cambridge. Lady Arabella. Maximilian's voice was smooth as silk as he joined them, a glass of lemonade in each hand. He offered one to Beatrice with a slight bow. I'd call that rather more than a hobby. Tell me, what scholarly works feature your watercolors? The silence that followed was exquisite. Arabella's face cycled through emotions, shock, fury, humiliation, before settling on cold composure. I'm certain I don't know what you mean, Your Grace. I was merely observing. I'm certain you were. Maximilian's tone remained pleasant, but his dismissal was absolute. Now, if you'll excuse us, I've been promising to show Miss Ashford the library. She has a particular interest in botanical references. He offered his arm, and Beatrice took it. Catching his eye as they turned away from the group, a look of shared amusement passed between them. Conspiracy, perhaps, or partnership. Whatever it was, it felt dangerous and exhilarating. Caroline fell into step behind them as they entered the house, her presence a necessary concession to propriety. The library really is spectacular, she said brightly. Though I warn you, Max will try to keep you there for hours discussing agricultural treatises, if you let him. I find agricultural treatises fascinating, Beatrice replied, and Caroline's laugh echoed through the marble entrance hall. The library was extraordinary. 3 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves accessible by rolling ladders, filled with leather-bound volumes whose gilt titles caught the light streaming through tall windows. First editions lined dedicated cases. Botanical prints in museum-quality frames adorned the walls. The scent of old leather and aging paper wrapped around Beatrice like an embrace. This is extraordinary. The words escaped before she could guard them. I've never seen such a collection outside of. She stopped herself, but Maximilian finished the thought quietly. Outside of what your family once had? Beatrice's throat tightened. Yes. My father's library was sold to pay debts. I saved 1 volume, Gerard's Herbal, a later edition. Everything else is gone. Maximilian moved to a glass-fronted case and removed a massive volume, its leather binding dark with age, its pages edged in gold. He carried it to her with the reverence it deserved. First edition Gerard's Herbal, 1,597. He placed it in her hands. Consider it on permanent loan. The weight of it was substantial, but nothing compared to the weight of the gesture. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears she couldn't control. I can't. That's worth more than. It's worth exactly what it provides. Knowledge and pleasure. If you'll value it, that's payment enough. His grey eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I would treasure it. Her voice was barely a whisper. But this is too much, too valuable. I couldn't possibly. Then don't think of it as a gift. Think of it as a loan. Return it when you've exhausted its usefulness. His slight smile suggested he knew that would be never. Or consider it payment for the illustration you'll do of the Ashbourne Rose collection. I've been meaning to commission a botanical study for years. Caroline had drifted to the far side of the library, examining volumes with studious concentration that was clearly performative, granting them the illusion of privacy. Why did you risk everything for one night at a ball? Maximilian's question was quiet but direct. The real reason. Beatrice set the precious volume on the desk beside them, kneading her hands free. Because I realized I was disappearing, not just from society, but from myself. I was becoming a shadow, careful, quiet, grateful for scraps. That forged invitation felt like a test. Would I be brave enough to reach for something, even if it was a trap? I decided being humiliated was preferable to being nothing. You could never be nothing. His voice held a certainty that made her chest ache. You don't know that. You don't know me. I know you stood there facing public disgrace without begging or making excuses. I know you speak your mind, even when discretion would be wiser. I know you value knowledge over decoration, substance over pretense. He stepped closer. I know I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that night. The air between them seemed to thicken. Beatrice forced herself to meet his gaze. Your Grace, I appreciate your kindness, but I understand what this is. I'm a curiosity, perhaps a rebellion against your mother's expectations. But your world and mine, they don't intersect. They can't. What if I'm tired of my world? The intensity in his voice surprised them both. What if I'm tired of appropriate matches and strategic alliances, and women who see me as a title rather than a person? Maximilian, she used his given name without thinking. You're a duke. You have responsibilities, expectations, a position to maintain. I'm a botanical illustrator who lives in Clerkenwell and works for trade. We're not. Miss Ashford, Caroline's voice carried across the library with perfect timing. Some of the guests are departing. We should return to the garden. The moment shattered. Maximilian stepped back, his expression carefully neutral once more, but Beatrice could see the frustration in the set of his jaw. They returned to the garden where guests were indeed preparing to leave, making their farewells and compliments. Beatrice collected her sketchpad and reticule, her mind still reeling from the library conversation. She was moving toward the drive where her hired carriage waited when Lady Arabella materialized in the hallway, blocking her path with the precision of a strategist. You think you're clever, don't you? Arabella's voice was low, her smile sharp. Playing the brave little pauper, so refreshingly different from society, ladies. But I assure you, the Duke needs more than novelty. He needs an appropriate wife who can manage his estates, host political dinners, and provide connections that matter. For 2 years, Beatrice had made herself small, careful, invisible. But something had shifted at the Silverton ball, and it couldn't be reversed. You're absolutely right, Lady Arabella. Her voice was steady. He does need those things, which is why I'm confused about why you're so concerned about me. If I'm as inappropriate as you say, I'm no threat at all. She let her eyes sharpen. Unless you're not as certain of your position as you pretend to be. Arabella's mask slipped for just a moment, fury blazing through the cracks. The Duke and I have an understanding. Then you have nothing to worry about. Beatrice stepped around her. Good day, Lady Arabella. Her heart pounded as she walked away, amazed at her own boldness. Her hands trembled as she climbed into the hired carriage, but she kept her spine straight, her head high. The carriage had traveled perhaps half a mile when she heard hoofbeats. Through the window, she saw Maximilian riding alongside, his horse matching their pace with ease. He gestured for the driver to stop, and when the carriage halted, he dismounted and approached her window. Miss Ashford, Beatrice, I need to see you again. His breathing was slightly elevated from the ride, his hair disheveled by wind. Not for society's entertainment, not to prove anything to Lady Arabella. For myself, Your Grace. Maximilian. When we're private, call me Maximilian. Maximilian. His name felt dangerous on her tongue. What are you asking me? I don't know yet. His honesty was disarming. But I'd like the opportunity to discover it. Will you allow me to call on you? Regularly, properly. Every practical instinct screamed at her to refuse. This could only end in heartbreak, hers, inevitably. He was a duke with responsibilities to his name, his estates, his position. She was nobody, nothing, a woman who worked for her living and would never be accepted by his world. But she thought of disappearing, of becoming a shadow again, of careful and quiet and grateful for scraps. "Yes," she whispered, "you may call." His expression transformed relief and something deeper, more complex. "Thank you." He remounted and rode back toward Ashbourne Park as her carriage continued its journey. Beatrice turned to watch through the rear window, seeing him grow smaller in the distance, and there, in an upper window of the great house, was a figure she recognized even at this distance. Lady Arabella, watching, her face a mask of absolute fury. Beatrice turned forward again, her heart racing with equal parts fear and exhilaration. She had stepped fully into dangerous territory now, and there was no retreating to safety. But perhaps, she thought as London's rooftops appeared on the horizon, safety had always been an illusion anyway. Chapter 5. Courtship and Complications. 4 weeks transformed everything and nothing. The rain-streaked windows of Beatrice's studio framed a world that looked the same modest street in Clerkenwell, the same chimney pots and washing lines, but felt entirely different. She set down her pen, abandoning yet another illustration she couldn't concentrate on, and pressed her fingers to her temples. Maximilian had called 17 times in 4 weeks. She knew the exact count because each visit was catalogued in her memory with perfect clarity. The way he looked at her botanical specimens with genuine interest, the timbre of his voice when they argued about politics, the warmth of his hand when he helped her navigate a muddy path in Regent's Park. The courtship had developed a pattern. He arrived precisely at 2 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sometimes bringing Caroline, always observing the proprieties that Aunt Philippa insisted upon. They walked in Regent's Park with her aunt, trailing at a discreet distance. They discussed everything: literature, agricultural reform, the moral implications of industrialization, the precise genus of an unusual fern Beatrice had sketched. Last Tuesday, rain had trapped them indoors. They'd sat in the tiny parlor while water sheeted down the windows, and somehow the conversation had turned to the factory reform proposals pending in Parliament. "The mill owners argue that regulations will destroy British competitiveness," Maximilian had said, his tone careful, testing perhaps, to see how she'd respond. "The mill owners profit from 16-hour days and children losing fingers in machinery." Beatrice's passion had overridden her caution. Competitiveness built on human suffering is barbarism dressed in economic theory. "You oversimplify complex market forces." He'd stopped at her expression, then reconsidered. "Actually, you're right. I was repeating arguments I've heard without examining their moral foundation. Tell me what you've seen." She'd told him about the crossing sweeper she passed daily, a girl of perhaps 10 whose cough suggested consumption, about the factory workers in street Giles she'd observed when delivering illustrations to her publisher, about hunger that made children old before their time. He'd listened with complete attention, asking questions, challenging some assertions but genuinely engaging with her arguments. When he'd left, she'd seen him making notes in a small leather journal he carried. 3 days ago, he'd brought Caroline to meet Aunt Philippa properly. The older women had discovered shared memories of balls and scandals from their youth, laughing over recollections, while Beatrice and Maximilian had escaped to the small garden behind the house, barely more than a courtyard, really, with a struggling rose and some hardy lavender. "Your aunt was quite beautiful in her youth, apparently," Maximilian had observed, watching Philippa's animated conversation through the window. "Caroline says she was one of the acknowledged beauties of her season. She gave it all up to care for her sister, my mother, when she fell ill." Beatrice had touched the rose's petals gently. "She could have married well, but she chose family instead. I've always admired that. Choosing what matters over what's expected." His voice had been quiet. "That takes courage." Yesterday, he'd taken her to a botanical exhibition at the Royal Society. The official guide had been knowledgeable but conventional, reciting facts without genuine understanding. When he'd misidentified a specimen of Helleborus orientalis as H. niger, Beatrice had corrected him before thinking. The guide had bristled, but Maximilian had encouraged her. "Miss Ashford is a published botanical illustrator. I trust her expertise." She'd ended up leading an impromptu discussion of the Helleborus genus, acutely aware of Maximilian's pride in her knowledge, of the way he watched her with something that looked dangerously like admiration. "You're thinking of him again," Aunt Philippa's voice interrupted her reverie. The older woman stood in the doorway, tea tray in hand, her expression fond and concerned in equal measure. "Was I that obvious? My dear child, You've been staring at that blank page for 20 minutes. Philippa set down the tray. I see how you look at him, and how he looks at you. But you must be practical. What future can there be? Beatrice's throat tightened. I know, Aunt. I know it's impossible, but I can't seem to help. Loving him? The word hung in the air between them. Beatrice had been avoiding it, refusing to name what she felt, but hearing it spoken made denial impossible. Yes, her voice was barely a whisper, and it's the most foolish thing I've ever done, which is saying something considering I once crashed a society ball with a forged invitation. Philippa sat heavily, her illness making the simple movement difficult. Perhaps not so foolish. He cares for you, Beatrice. That much is evident. But caring isn't enough when duty and position demand otherwise. I know. Beatrice pressed her palms against her eyes. I should end it before I'm hurt worse, before I damage his reputation further. Should you, or will you? Philippa's tone held the gentle challenge of someone who knew her too well. Across London, in Grosvenor Square, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne reviewed the reports her private inquiry agent had compiled. She was a woman who believed in thorough investigation, and Miss Beatrice Ashford had been investigated with the precision of a military campaign. The picture that emerged was complicated. The girl had breeding. The Ashfords were old Hampshire gentry, if not particularly wealthy. Her education had been excellent before the family's collapse. Her botanical illustrations were, by all accounts, remarkable. Publishers spoke of her with respect, usually reserved for established masters. But she was penniless. Her father's scandal, though not of his making, still tainted the family name. She worked for money, actually worked, in trade. She had no connections, no political value, no fortune to contribute to the Ashbourne estates. And her son was courting her with single-minded determination. You're serious about this girl? The Dowager made it a statement rather than a question when Maximilian entered her private sitting room. Her name is Beatrice, Mother, and yes. He settled into the chair opposite, his expression carefully neutral, the face he showed in Parliament, not the one he wore with family. Ashbourne, you're the Duke. Your marriage isn't merely personal, it's political, social, financial. The estates are profitable. His interruption was polite but firm. My political position is secure. What else do we need? A daughter-in-law who can navigate the highest circles, who brings alliances, who makes me want to be better than the position requires, who challenges me to think beyond tradition and duty. His mask slipped, revealing genuine feeling beneath. Who sees me as Maximilian rather than the Duke of Ashbourne? The Dowager studied her son with the shrewd attention that had made her a formidable political hostess for 40 years. You love her? Maximilian paused. The word hung between them, demanding acknowledgement. I respect her. I admire her. I enjoy her company more than anyone else's. That, my dear boy, is love. The Dowager's expression softened slightly. The question is whether you love her enough to defy convention, and whether she's strong enough to survive what that defiance will cost her. She's survived poverty, scandal, and 2 years of supporting herself through work that would break most gently bred ladies. She's stronger than you imagine. Perhaps, but society can be crueler than poverty. The dinner party at Ashbourne House was smaller than the Silverton Ball but more significant. 20 carefully selected guests. Lord James Hartwick, several of Maximilian's political allies, a few reformist thinkers, some moderate aristocrats. This was the first time Beatrice was being presented not as a curiosity, but as a potential partner. She wore her best dress, the seafoam silk from the Silverton Ball, carefully cleaned and pressed. It was still outdated, still clearly altered, but she held her head high as Maximilian introduced her. The dinner conversation ranged across politics and reform. When the discussion turned to education access, Beatrice found herself contributing observations about literacy rates among the working poor, about the barriers created by child labor, about the long-term economic benefits of universal education. Lord James challenged her gently. You make compelling arguments, Miss Ashford, but implementation requires funding. Who pays? Those who benefit from the current system. Her voice was steady. The mill owners, the factory operators, the landowners whose profits depend on cheap labor. A modest tax on industrial profits could fund comprehensive education without significantly impacting business viability. Several guests nodded thoughtfully. Others looked skeptical but interested. Maximilian watched her with undisguised pride. After dinner, Lord Pemberton cornered Maximilian in the library. Your Miss Ashford is charming, but Ashbourne, you must consider the factory reform vote is coming. If you're seen as too sympathetic to the working classes, as having been unduly influenced by personal sentiment, my vote will be based on conscience and careful study. Pemberton, your father always understood that business prosperity benefits everyone. These reforms will hurt profits, potentially damage your own estate incomes, and improve lives. Maximilian's patience was wearing thin. I'm examining all factors, Pemberton. Economic sustainability includes social stability. Exploited workers eventually revolt. History teaches that lesson repeatedly. Pemberton's expression darkened. I hope your judgment isn't being clouded by romantic entanglement with someone whose class sympathies are decidedly radical. After he left, Maximilian stood alone in the library, turning Pemberton's words over. Was he being influenced by Beatrice? Yes, but that influence was making him question assumptions he'd accepted without examination. Was that weakness or growth? The invitation to Thornfield Manor arrived 3 days later, exquisitely lettered on heavy cardstock. A lady's tea. Beatrice stared at it with growing dread. You don't have to go, Aunt Philippa said quietly. I do. Beatrice's jaw set with determination. Refusing would be acknowledging fear. I won't give her that satisfaction. Thornfield Manor in Belgravia was everything. Beatrice's world was not opulent, perfect, intimidating in its crystallized elegance. The drawing room where the tea was held could have housed her entire Clerkenwell lodging. 12 ladies attended, all from the highest circles, all perfectly turned out in the latest fashions. Arabella received her with a smile sharp as broken glass. Miss Ashford, how delightful you could join us. Ladies, you remember Miss Ashford from the Silverton Ball. The conversation flowed over topics designed to emphasize Beatrice's inadequacy. Estate management, the complexities of managing large households, the political nuances of strategic marriages. Of course, the Duke's future wife will need to oversee households in London, Richmond, Scotland, and Derbyshire, Lady Pemberton observed. That's quite an undertaking for someone unfamiliar with such responsibilities. I'm sure Miss Ashford could learn, given time. Arabella's sympathy was poisonous. Though managing hundreds of servants and hosting Parliament members requires rather more than charm and novelty. Beatrice had been silent, absorbing the cuts, but something inside her refused to accept the role of victim. You're absolutely right, Lady Arabella. I would need to learn a great deal, but I've noticed that necessity teaches faster than privilege. Those born to responsibility sometimes confuse inheritance with competence. The room went completely silent. Several ladies' teacups paused halfway to their lips. How refreshing to see such confidence. Arabella's smile could have cut diamonds. I hope the Duke finds it equally charming when the reality of his position demands more than rustic simplicity. Beatrice stood, setting down her untouched tea. Thank you for the invitation, Lady Arabella. It's been most illuminating. Good afternoon, ladies. She walked out with her spine straight and her head high, but her hands were shaking. That evening, she wrote to Maximilian requesting he meet her at Regent's Park the following morning. She spent the night rehearsing what she would say, that this courtship was impossible, that she would only damage his reputation, that they must end things before genuine harm was done. He arrived early, as she'd expected. But he wasn't alone. He carried a small leather portfolio under his arm. Your Grace Maximilian, these past weeks have been wonderful, but we must be realistic. Your position requires— I know what my position requires. His interruption was gentle but firm. The question is what I require. He opened the portfolio, revealing documents. Beatrice, I need to be direct. My mother is right that dukes marry for duty. My peers expect me to choose someone like Arabella, connected, trained, unassailable. But I've spent 3 years being courted by appropriate women and felt nothing but boredom and obligation. Then you should wait for an appropriate woman you don't find boring. I'm not interested in appropriate. I'm interested in you. He stepped closer. These weeks, you've challenged every assumption I had about what marriage should be. You've made me question policies I accepted without thought. You've made me want to be better than simply fulfilling my inherited role. Tears blurred her vision. That's beautiful, but it's not practical. I can't give you political alliances. I can't manage your estates without training. I'll make mistakes that reflect badly on you. Then we'll learn together. He took her hands. Beatrice, I'm not offering you a marriage of convenience. I'm offering you a partnership. You bring intelligence, integrity, and a perspective I desperately need. In exchange, I offer you security, position, and the resources to pursue your botanical work at the highest levels. You make it sound so reasonable, because it is reasonable. It's also terrifying and probably imprudent and will cause scandal. His grey eyes held hers with absolute certainty, but I've discovered I'd rather be imprudent with you than perfectly appropriate with anyone else. Not, I love you, not yet, but something more honest, more real. I choose you, Beatrice Ashford. Will you choose me? The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Every practical consideration screamed refusal. But when had she ever chosen the practical path? Yes, she whispered. Heaven help us both. But yes. Chapter 6. Engagement under Sieg. Yes. The word hung in the morning air of Regent's Park, irrevocable as a signed contract. Beatrice watched Maximilian's expression transform relief and wonder, and something deeper she didn't dare name. But I need time, she added quickly, her practical nature reasserting itself. Before a public announcement, I need to prepare myself mentally, practically. I can't simply step into your world without understanding what it demands. Of course, Maximilian's hand tightened on hers. But there are immediate steps we should take. You and your aunt, you can't remain in Clerkenwell. I own a house in Bloomsbury, currently unused. Nothing ostentatious, but comfortable, with space for your studio. Move there. Let me provide that much security at least. Pride warred with practicality in Beatrice's chest. I can't accept. You can. You will be my wife, Beatrice. Let me care for you and your aunt properly. His tone softened. Please. She nodded, not trusting her voice. And Caroline will begin teaching you household management. The practical aspects of running estates. You're intelligent, you'll learn quickly. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. This was my mother's secondary ring. Not the official ducal ring that comes with the public announcement, but something to remind you that this is real. The ring was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant without being ostentatious. He slipped it onto her finger, and the weight of it felt like promise and terror combined. It's beautiful, she whispered. So are you. His voice was quiet. And braver than you know. The house in Bloomsbury was a revelation. 3 stories of cream-colored stone, a small garden, rooms filled with light. Compared to their Clerkenwell lodgings, it was palatial. Aunt Philippa wept when she saw her new bedchamber, spacious enough for comfortable movement despite her illness. I never thought, Philippa's voice broke. After everything, I never imagined such comfort again. Beatrice held her aunt close, guilt and gratitude warring in her chest. Was she doing the right thing, or was she dragging them both into a catastrophe? But there was no time for doubt. 2 days after moving, Caroline arrived with Mrs. Blackwood, the Ashbourne House housekeeper. Mrs. Blackwood was 60, grey-haired, and possessed of the kind of dignity that came from decades of authority. Her initial skepticism was visible in every line of her posture as she regarded Beatrice in the Bloomsbury parlour. Miss Ashford. The greeting was correct but cool. Lady Caroline suggests you wish to learn household management. I need to learn, Beatrice corrected. There's a significant difference between wish and necessity. Something shifted in Mrs. Blackwood's expression, approval perhaps, or recognition of honesty. Indeed. Well then, we should begin with the basics. What followed was an intensive education in a world Beatrice had never imagined. The sheer scale of Ashbourne House's operations was staggering. 47 servants in London alone, not counting the staff at Richmond, Scotland, and Derbyshire. Schedules, budgets, protocols for everything, from breakfast service to state dinners. Beatrice approached it with the same methodical precision she brought to botanical illustration. She made lists, drew organizational charts, asked endless questions. Mrs. Blackwood, initially skeptical, began warming to her genuine interest. You actually want to understand the systems, the housekeeper observed after their 3rd session. Most ladies of quality view household management as beneath their notice. They simply expect everything to function magically. Nothing functions magically, Beatrice replied, studying the duty roster. Everything requires planning, coordination, and respect for the people doing the work. Caroline, watching from across the room, smiled. You're more capable than you think, and more capable than Arabella, who's never actually managed anything. She just assumes she could. Assuming and achieving are different things, Beatrice murmured, but Caroline's words warmed something in her chest. The summons to meet formally with the Dowager Duchess arrived 3 days later. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best day gown, still modest but respectable, and presented herself at Ashbourne House with her heart hammering against her ribs. The Dowager received her in her private sitting room, a space of elegant restraint that somehow felt more intimidating than overt grandeur. The older woman gestured to a chair and studied Beatrice with the same assessing gaze she'd used at the Silverton ball. "My son tells me you've accepted his proposal." "Yes, Your Grace." "Do you love him?" The directness of the question stole Beatrice's breath. Yes, I do." "Good. Affection makes the inevitable difficulties more bearable." The Dowager poured tea with precise movements. "But you must understand what you're accepting, Miss Ashford. You'll be criticized, constantly. Your background will be discussed. Your father's failures will be resurrected. Every mistake you make will be magnified, because you're not one of them." "I know, Your Grace." Beatrice's voice trembled slightly but held firm. "I'm terrified. But I've also survived real poverty, real loss, and real obscurity. I think I can survive society's disapproval." The Dowager was silent for a long moment, her sharp eyes never leaving Beatrice's face. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "You might at that. Maximilian needs someone strong, not someone decorative. Someone who will challenge him rather than simply agreeing with whatever he says." She set down her teacup. "Welcome to the family, Miss Ashford. Now, let us discuss the practical matters of your wedding." Maximilian insisted on taking Beatrice to Richmond to meet his tenants. "You should see the practical side of what this position entails," he explained as their carriage rolled through the countryside. "It's not all ballrooms and social calls." The Richmond estate was beautiful rolling fields, tenant cottages, the main house commanding a hill with views to the Thames. But what struck Beatrice most was the parade of concerns that met them. A tenant whose roof leaked, another worried about crop rotation, a dispute over property boundaries. Maximilian handled each with patient attention, but Beatrice found herself asking questions that revealed her genuine concern for the people involved. "What about the widow's cottage?" she asked after one tenant departed. "He mentioned repairs are needed, but implied the funds weren't available." "The estate steward prioritizes income-generating properties," Maximilian explained. "But she's elderly and alone. Surely basic weatherproofing is a moral obligation, not an economic calculation." His expression shifted consideration, perhaps, or recognition. "You're right. I'll speak to the steward." An older woman, Mrs. Cooper, lingered after others had left. "Your Grace, if I may, your father, he was a fair master, but hard, more concerned with profits than people, if you understand me." She glanced at Beatrice. "You seem different, if you don't mind my saying." Maximilian's gaze found Beatrice. "Perhaps I'm learning to be." The public announcement came at a formal dinner 2 weeks later. Ashbourne House blazed with candles, 50 guests assembled in the state dining room, political figures, family members, key society leaders, and Lady Arabella Thornfield, deliberately invited to witness her defeat. Maximilian stood, commanding immediate silence with his presence. "I have an announcement to make. Miss Beatrice Ashford has done me the honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. We will wed in 3 weeks at St. George's, Hanover Square." The reactions were immediate and varied. Caroline beamed. The Dowager nodded with satisfaction. Lord James raised his glass with genuine warmth. But others, Lord Pemberton's expression was tight with disapproval. Several society matrons exchanged significant glances, and whispers rippled through the room. "Quite a surprise, Ashbourne." Pemberton's voice carried across the sudden buzz of conversation. "I hope this doesn't signal a shift in your political positions." "It signals that I choose my own wife, Pemberton." Maximilian's tone was pleasant but steel-edged. "My political positions will be based on principle and evidence, as always." Beatrice sat frozen, acutely aware of every eye upon her, every whispered assessment. Lady Arabella maintained perfect composure, raising her glass with the others, her smile never wavering. Later, in the ladies' retiring room, Arabella's mask finally slipped. "You think you've won?" Her voice was low, vicious. "But you have no idea what you've stepped into. The Duchess of Ashbourne is expected to host the Prime Minister, to influence policy through strategic social connections, to maintain alliances that preserve the family's power. You'll be a laughingstock. And when the Duke realizes his mistake, I'll be waiting." Beatrice met her gaze steadily. "If you truly believed that, Lady Arabella, you wouldn't be here warning me. You'd be confident in my inevitable failure. The fact that you're threatened suggests you recognize I might succeed. That must be terrifying for you." Arabella's composure cracked. "You smug little—" The door opened. Caroline entered, her expression shifting from pleasant to alert in an instant. "Is there a problem, Lady Arabella?" Arabella's mask snapped back into place. "No problem at all. I was just offering Miss Ashford my felicitations." She swept past them both, leaving tension thick in the air. "She's dangerous when cornered," Caroline said quietly. "Be careful." "I know." Beatrice's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "But I'm tired of being careful." Late that night, after the guests had finally departed, Beatrice found herself alone in the library, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd agreed to. The weight of expectations pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. "You're hiding." Maximilian's voice came from the doorway. "I'm thinking." She didn't turn around. "Tonight, watching those people look at me like I'm an unsuitable interloper." "You are an interloper." He crossed to her side. "So am I, in my own way. I've realized I don't want to live the life prescribed for me. I want to live a life I choose." She turned to face him, finding his grey eyes steady on hers. "What if I fail? What if I can't be what they expect? Then we'll redefine expectations together." He reached for her, and this time when their lips met, it wasn't the careful restraint of their previous brief touches. This was deep, passionate, revealing desire they'd both been suppressing. His hands tangled in her hair, hers gripped his shoulders, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this heat and want and connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should wait until after the wedding," Beatrice began, but her voice lacked conviction. "We should," Maximilian agreed, but neither moved away. They stood there, foreheads touching, the library silent around them, propriety and passion warring until finally, reluctantly, they stepped apart. 3 weeks, Maximilian said quietly. "I can survive 3 weeks. So can I." But her voice trembled with uncertainty about whether that was true. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. The Dowager insisted on a large society wedding. "If we do this, we do it properly," making a statement that we're not ashamed. Guest lists, flowers, dinner courses, seating arrangements, 1,000 details that Beatrice had no experience with. Aunt Philippa, surprisingly, came into her own. For the first time in years, she had purpose beyond mere survival. She managed details with the grace of her youth, coordinating with the Dowager, making decisions when Beatrice was overwhelmed. One afternoon, Beatrice escaped to a modest dressmaker Caroline had recommended. "I want botanical embroidery," she told the seamstress. "Hellebores climbing the hem and bodice. Something that shows who I am, not who they expect me to be." The dressmaker's eyes lit up. "I can do that. It will be beautiful." That small moment of control, of asserting her identity, felt like victory. 3 days before the wedding, the catastrophe struck. Beatrice woke to find Aunt Philippa white-faced, newspapers clutched in her trembling hands. "The Duke's dubious choice. Miss Ashford's family history examined," screamed the headline. The article beneath was devastating, documents suggesting Thomas Ashford's business failure wasn't misfortune but fraud, implications of criminal activity, questions about Beatrice's suitability to enter the highest circles. "It's Arabella," Beatrice whispered, reading with growing horror. "She's dredged up every piece of scandal, twisted everything. My dear, I'm destroying his reputation before we're even married." Tears blurred her vision. "He should reconsider. I'll release him from the engagement." "You'll do no such thing." Maximilian's voice came from the doorway. He must have come directly from his morning ride, still in his riding clothes. His expression was fury incarnate, not at her, she realized, but at the world that would use her father's tragedy as a weapon. "Maximilian." "No, we face this together, and I'm done playing their games." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "Beatrice, listen to me. Your father was sabotaged by ruthless men. That's not scandal, that's tragedy, and I will make sure everyone knows the truth. But your reputation, my reputation is my concern. Yours is being the woman I choose to marry. Nothing else matters." His certainty should have comforted her. Instead, it terrified her because she knew that nothing, absolutely nothing, was that simple. Chapter 7. The Wedding and Its Test. St. George's, Hanover Square, was packed to capacity. Every pew held society's finest, or perhaps its most curious, dressed in their most elaborate finery. Beatrice stood in the vestibule, her hand trembling on Aunt Philippa's arm, and wondered if she could actually walk down that impossibly long aisle. Her dress was ivory silk, simple in cut, but extraordinary in detail. Delicate hellebores climbed the hem and bodice in botanical precision, her own design, executed by the dressmaker with painstaking care. Each petal, each stamen, was accurate enough for a scientific illustration. It was a statement. She was bringing herself to this marriage, not becoming someone else. "You can still change your mind," Aunt Philippa whispered, though her eyes were bright with tears. "No one would blame you. I would blame me." Beatrice straightened her spine. "I choose this. I choose him." The organ swelled into the processional. The congregation rose as one, hundreds of faces turning toward her. She caught glimpses as she walked, Caroline beaming with genuine joy, the Dowager Duchess nodding with approval, Lord Pemberton's skeptical expression, Lady Arabella's carefully blank face that couldn't quite hide the fury in her eyes. And then she saw Maximilian at the altar, and the world narrowed to just him, the wonder in his expression, the certainty, the way his entire bearing seemed to steady when their eyes met. That look said everything words couldn't. "You're not alone. We're doing this together." The whispers never entirely stopped. Even as she reached the altar, even as the vicar began the ceremony, she could hear the rustle of speculation, the murmured assessments. But Maximilian's hand found hers, warm and solid, and she focused on that anchor. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the vicar intoned. Aunt Philippa's voice rang out clearly, breaking with tradition. "She gives herself, with my blessing." The murmurs intensified. Beatrice felt Maximilian's hand tighten on hers support, not censure. The vows themselves passed in a blur. Maximilian's voice was firm, unwavering. When it came time for the ring, his hands were steady as he slipped the heavy gold band onto her finger, the official Duchess's ring, centuries old, now hers. Beatrice's voice wavered slightly on her vows, but she pushed through. "I, Beatrice, take thee, Maximilian." She was choosing this, claiming this, despite everything. "I now pronounce you man and wife." The kiss was brief, proper for church, but Beatrice felt the promise in it nonetheless. Ashbourne House had been transformed. Every room blazed with flowers and candles, tables laden with delicacies, champagne flowing freely. Hundreds of guests filled the reception rooms far more than had attended the ceremony itself. Many looked genuinely happy. Many more looked like they'd come to witness a spectacle. The receiving line was an ordeal. Guest after guest, congratulations that ranged from sincere to cutting. "How unusual, Your Grace, to choose a bride from such limited circumstances." The elderly Countess of Cheswick's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I hope she proves adaptable." Maximilian's response was immediate. "My wife is the most adaptable person I know, Lady Cheswick. She survived things your pampered daughters could never imagine." The Countess's expression froze. She moved on without another word. When they finally escaped the receiving line, Lord James Hartwick rose to give the toast. He was Maximilian's closest friend, and his honesty was both blessing and curse. "I've known Ashbourne since Cambridge," James began, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "I've never seen him happier or more certain of a decision. Miss Ashford, the Duchess of Ashbourne, now has done something remarkable. She's made him remember that duty and happiness need not be mutually exclusive." To the Duke and Duchess. The applause was polite but not universal. Several guests lifted their glasses with visible reluctance. Beatrice was attempting to navigate conversation with a group of political wives when she noticed Lord Pemberton and several other men cornering Maximilian across the room. Their body language was aggressive, confrontational. Caroline appeared at her elbow. "They're discussing the factory reform vote. It's scheduled for 2 days after you return from honeymoon. I can tell it's not going well. They're blaming you already for any political position of Max's they don't like. It will always be this way." Caroline's tone was matter-of-fact. "Every unpopular decision he makes, they'll attribute to your influence." "I know." Beatrice's chest tightened. "I'm making everything harder for him." "No, you're making him braver. There's a difference." Caroline squeezed her arm. "He needs that. We all do." The departure was scheduled for late afternoon. Beatrice was collecting her things when Lady Arabella materialized in the hallway, blocking her path with deliberate precision. "Enjoy your moment, Duchess." Arabella's voice was low, vicious. "When he realizes what you've cost him politically, socially, when his peers turn against him because of you, I'll be waiting." Beatrice met her gaze steadily. Something had shifted during the ceremony, during those vows. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne now. She was done cowering. "Lady Arabella, I've married him. You've lost. Find another obsession." Arabella's face contorted with fury, but before she could respond, Maximilian appeared. He took Beatrice's hand without even glancing at Arabella and led her toward the waiting carriage. The ultimate dismissal. The journey to the Lake District took most of 2 days. They stopped at coaching inns, maintained the proprieties, but exhaustion and relief mixed in equal measure. "Do you regret it?" Maximilian asked as their carriage rolled through increasingly wild landscape. "The truth. Ask me again in a year." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder, too tired to maintain perfect posture. "But right now? No. Terrified? Yes. Regretful? No." "Good, because I'm not letting you escape now." She laughed, the first genuine laugh in days. "I think escape would require more energy than I currently possess." The hunting lodge was perfect. Rustic elegance nestled in hills that rolled down to a dark lake, surrounded by forest. No servants beyond a couple who managed the property and lived in a separate cottage. Complete privacy. That night, in the bedroom with its massive fireplace and simple furnishings, Beatrice's nervousness returned. She'd been educated in the theoretical aspects of marital relations, but theory and practice were vastly different things. Maximilian must have sensed her tension. He approached slowly, giving her time to adjust. "We don't have to. I want to." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm just nervous." "So am I." His admission surprised her. "This matters, Beatrice. You matter. I don't want to." She kissed him, cutting off his worry. What followed was tender, careful, occasionally awkward but filled with genuine care. He was patient, attentive, making this about connection rather than conquest. Afterward, lying together in the firelight, Beatrice felt something settle in her chest. "This is the first moment I've felt married. Not during the ceremony, not at the reception. Now. We're away from all of them. Just us." Maximilian's fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking I love you." The words emerged easier than she expected. "I haven't said it because it seemed too vulnerable when everything else was uncertain, but I love you." His response wasn't flowery or elaborate, but it was deeply felt. "I loved you when you admitted you'd crashed that ball knowing the invitation was forged. That's when I knew you had more courage than anyone I'd met. I love you, Beatrice. Not despite what you are, but because of it." The week that followed was the happiest of Beatrice's life. They walked through hills carpeted with heather, Beatrice sketching the local flora, while Maximilian read beside her. They spent evenings before the fire, reading aloud to each other, discussing everything and nothing. Their physical intimacy grew more natural, more joyful, as initial nervousness gave way to genuine exploration. "I never learned to ride properly," Beatrice admitted one morning. "We had horses when I was young, but after father died, then we'll remedy that." Maximilian arranged for gentle mounts, spending hours teaching her proper form, laughing when she nearly fell, catching her when she actually did. Midweek, a messenger arrived with newspapers and correspondence. The outside world intruded on their sanctuary. Maximilian read through the letters with growing tension. The factory reform debate is intensifying. Pemberton and his allies are demanding I commit to opposing it. But there was also a letter for Beatrice, from Thornbury and Sons. She read it with growing wonder. "Your Grace, congratulations on your marriage. We hope this does not mean we're losing our finest botanical illustrator. We have a commission for a comprehensive British flora series that we believe only you could execute." "They still want my work." Tears blurred her vision. "I thought becoming Duchess would mean giving up everything I was." "Never." Maximilian pulled her close. "Your work is part of who you are. I didn't marry you to change you." Their last night at the lodge, reality pressed closer. Tomorrow they would return to London, to Parliament, to society's judgment. "The mill owners believe I've influenced you," Beatrice said quietly. "If you vote for reform, they'll blame me and use it against you politically. If you vote against reform, people suffer. I don't know how to live with either outcome." "Then let me tell you what I've decided. I'm voting for reform." His voice was certain. "Not because you influenced me, though your perspective helped me see things I'd ignored, but because it's right. I've examined the proposals thoroughly. Yes, it will cost the estate's income, but the human cost of the current system is indefensible. They'll say I manipulated you." "Let them." He took her hands. I'd rather be accused of caring about people than celebrated for ignoring suffering. You're sure? I've never been more certain. But Beatrice, this is just the beginning. Every decision I make will be scrutinized through the lens of our marriage. They'll blame you for anything they don't like. Can you bear that? She thought of the wedding, of Arabella's fury, of Lord Pemberton's disapproval. She thought of the life she'd survived before: Maximilian, poverty, loss, invisibility. She thought of the woman she'd become, strong enough to crash a ball, brave enough to claim a duke, determined enough to fight for her place. As long as we're honest with each other about the choices we're making, I won't be your excuse, and I won't be your scapegoat, but I'll be your partner. That's all I need. He kissed her, deep and certain. That's everything. Chapter 8. Partnership forged. London in autumn was a different world from the Lake District's tranquil isolation. The moment their carriage rolled through Ashbourne House's gates, reality crashed down with the weight of centuries. Servants lined up for formal greetings. Mrs. Blackwood presented a formidable list of household matters requiring the Duchess's attention. A mountain of correspondence awaited Maximilian's review. Half of it related to the factory reform vote, scheduled for the week's end. Beatrice stood in the entrance hall, still in her travelling clothes, and felt the enormity of her new position settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. "Your Grace," Mrs. Blackwood said, and it took Beatrice a moment to realize the housekeeper was addressing her. "Shall we review the week's social calendar?" The social calendar, the household accounts, the charitable patronages she was now expected to oversee, the political dinners she would host, the society ladies who would judge her every move. "Yes," Beatrice heard herself say. "Let's begin." The Dowager Duchess's formal tea came 3 days after their return. 20 influential ladies gathered in Ashbourne House's drawing room, wives of peers, political hostesses, arbiters of social acceptability. Beatrice was to preside alongside the Dowager, her first major test as the new Duchess. She dressed carefully in a gown Caroline had helped her select, fashionable but not ostentatious, elegant but not trying too hard. Her hands trembled as she descended the stairs, but she forced them steady. The conversation ranged across topics Beatrice had no experience with: the intricacies of court presentation, the politics of opera box arrangements, the subtle hierarchies of social precedence. She listened more than she spoke, asked intelligent questions, and refused to pretend knowledge she didn't possess. "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said, her tone suggesting a test, "what are your thoughts on the education question? Some believe expanding access to primary education for the lower classes creates unrealistic expectations." Beatrice met her gaze directly. "I believe education creates opportunity, Lady Pemberton. I've seen children with extraordinary potential trapped by circumstance. A girl who might have been a scholar working in a factory because her family needed the wages. A boy who understood mathematics instinctively sweeping crossings. Unrealistic expectations or wasted potential?" Several ladies exchanged glances. Lady Hartwick, Lord James's mother, nodded with approval. "Well said, Your Grace. Practical experience provides perspective that theory alone cannot." But there were failures too. When arranging seating for refreshments, Beatrice placed the wife of a baron before the daughter of an earl, a breach of precedence that caused visible offence. She recovered quickly, apologizing with genuine contrition. But the mistake had been noted. Afterward, alone with the Dowager, Beatrice waited for judgment. "You'll make mistakes," the Dowager said, her tone matter-of-fact rather than critical. "But you recover well, and you don't dissemble. That's more important than perfection. Perfection is performance. Authenticity is rare." The day of the factory reform vote, Maximilian left for Parliament at dawn. Beatrice couldn't attend. Women were barred from the chamber, but she waited with Caroline and the Dowager in the drawing room, tension coiling tighter with each passing hour. In the Commons chamber, Maximilian rose to speak. The room was packed, the gallery filled with observers, the air thick with anticipation and animosity. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the chamber, "I stand before you not as a romantic or an idealist, but as a landowner who has examined these proposals with careful economic and moral analysis." He laid out his argument methodically: the unsustainable nature of the current system, the long-term economic benefits of worker stability, the moral imperative of basic safety and fair treatment. "I've begun implementing these reforms on my own estates. Initial costs are high, yes, but worker retention has increased significantly, productivity has improved, Loyalty, something no amount of coercion can purchase, has strengthened. This is sound business practice, gentlemen, not merely charity. The vote was close. Reformers cheered when the results were announced. Traditionalists looked grim. Lord Pemberton's expression as he passed Maximilian in the lobby was one of betrayed fury. "Your wife has made you soft, Ashbourne," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Your father would be ashamed." Maximilian's response was quiet but firm. "My father is dead. I answer to my conscience and my constituents, not to ghosts." When he returned home, Beatrice met him in the entrance hall. The relief on his face told her everything before he spoke. It passed. She went into his arms, not caring that servants might see. "You did the right thing. Perhaps. Or perhaps I've destroyed my political future." But his smile suggested he'd made peace with that possibility. A week later, at a reception hosted by the Countess of Marlborough, Lady Arabella made her final, desperate move. She approached Beatrice in a quiet corner, her expression a mixture of triumph and desperation. "Your Grace, I thought you should see these." She extended a packet of letters tied with ribbon. "I found them while organizing my family's correspondence. Letters from the Duke, written years ago. Before you." Beatrice's hands shook as she took them. The handwriting was unmistakably similar to Maximilian's, the same confident strokes, the same aristocratic flourishes. "My dearest Arabella, I find myself thinking of our future together with increasing certainty. My mother approves, our families are aligned, and I confess the prospect of you as my Duchess grows more appealing with each passing day." "He loved me once," Arabella said softly. "Perhaps he still does. You're convenient, my dear, but convenience isn't love." Beatrice's vision blurred, but then her artist's training asserted itself. She looked more carefully at the paper, too bright, too modern, the ink too fresh, without the aging that 3 years would produce. The handwriting similar but not quite right. The M in Maximilian, slightly different. "These are forgeries, Lady Arabella." Beatrice's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Rather good ones, but forgeries nonetheless." Arabella's mask shattered. "You've ruined everything. He was supposed to marry me. My family expected. I expected." Something shifted in Beatrice's chest. Not triumph, but unexpected sympathy. "I understand being invisible. I understand wanting something you can't have. But Maximilian never loved you, Lady Arabella. Forging letters won't change that. Neither will punishing me." "You condescending little." "No, I'm not condescending. I'm being honest." Beatrice's voice was gentle. "You're beautiful, accomplished, everything society says a duchess should be, but you don't love him either. You love what he represents. Find someone who loves you for yourself, not for your pedigree." Arabella's composure cracked completely. She fled without another word, leaving Beatrice holding the forged letters. That evening, Beatrice showed Maximilian the letters. His fury was immediate and absolute. "This ends now." He sent formal notice to the Thornfield family that Lady Arabella was no longer welcome at any Ashbourne property. Through careful private channels, never public scandal, but strategic whispers, he made clear why. Arabella's social influence crumbled. Within days, invitations dried up. Her desperate grab for power had destroyed the position she'd fought so hard to maintain. A month after the wedding, Beatrice and Maximilian hosted their first major political dinner. 40 guests, reformers, moderates, some of Maximilian's traditional allies, testing the waters after his controversial vote, and key political figures whose support or opposition could shape his future. Beatrice had prepared obsessively. She'd worked with Mrs. Blackwood on a menu that balanced elegance with substance. She'd planned seating to encourage productive conversations, placing allies near potential converts, separating those whose animosity might disrupt the evening. She'd researched each guest's interests, concerns, and political positions. During dinner, she navigated conversation with the skill of growing confidence. When discussion turned to factory conditions, she contributed observations without dominating. When talk shifted to art patronage, her genuine knowledge impressed skeptics. When Lady Pemberton tested her with questions about household management, Beatrice passed with competence earned through weeks of intensive study. The most significant moment came when Lord Ashbury, an elderly MP who'd opposed the factory reform, approached her privately. "Your Grace, I voted against your husband's position." His tone was frank. "But I respect that he voted his conscience. That's becoming rare in politics." He respects that you did the same, Lord Ashbury. Beatrice met his eyes. My husband believes honest disagreement strengthens governance. The MP's expression shifted to surprised approval. You're not what I expected. Few people are, given the chance. Across the room, Lord James observed to Maximilian, you were right to marry her. She's extraordinary. I know. Maximilian watched Beatrice with undisguised admiration. The question was whether everyone else would see it. They're starting to. Late that night, after the last guest had departed, Beatrice sank into a library chair, exhausted but exhilarated. I think I might actually be able to do this. Maximilian pulled her to her feet, drawing her close. You are doing it, and better than anyone expected, including possibly yourself. They stood together in the quiet, the weight of the evening settling into satisfaction. The challenges won't disappear, Maximilian said honestly. Social judgment will continue, political opposition will persist, we'll both make mistakes. But we'll make them together, Beatrice's voice was certain. That's what matters. Do you remember when I said I couldn't promise love, only practical partnership? I remember. I was a fool, or perhaps a coward. His grey eyes held hers. What we have is so much more than I imagined possible. The final resolution came with the British Flora Commission. Beatrice accepted it, and Maximilian had a proper studio created for her at Ashbourne House Northern Light, space for specimens, a library of botanical references that rivaled any university's collection. You'll be the Duchess of Ashbourne and a working botanical illustrator, he said as she examined the space with wonder. Unconventional, but authentically you. Society will criticize. Let them. Your work is part of who you are. I didn't marry you to change you, but to build a life with you. 6 months after their wedding, Ashbourne House hosted a grand ball. Beatrice descended the stairs as hostess, confident and gracious, every inch the Duchess. The Whispers now held grudging respect rather than pure scandal. During the evening, she noticed a young woman hovering at the ballroom's edge, awkward, uncomfortable, clearly not belonging. Beatrice approached with a warm smile. I'm so glad you could attend. Are you interested in the paintings? The Ashbourne collection includes some remarkable botanical illustrations. The girl's relief was immediate. I am, Your Grace. I'm hoping to study natural science, though my family thinks it's unsuitable. Then we must discuss it. Come, let me introduce you to some guests who share your interests. The parallel wasn't lost on Beatrice, using her position to include rather than exclude, to lift rather than diminish. Late that night, she and Maximilian retreated to the library, where their journey had truly begun. Do you ever think about that forged invitation? Maximilian asked, pulling her close. Who sent it? Beatrice laughed. I've developed a theory. Arabella sent it intending to humiliate me, but perhaps a sympathetic servant didn't realize the malicious intent. So what was meant to destroy me actually gave me you. The universe's joke on Lady Arabella. Or perhaps fate. I don't believe in fate. Neither did I. But I'm reconsidering. Their conversation turned to future plans, the charitable work Beatrice wanted to establish, Maximilian's next political initiatives, their partnership evolving and growing. And children, Maximilian's voice was tentative. Someday, Beatrice smiled, when we're ready. Though given how unconventional everything else about our marriage is, our children will probably scandalize society simply by existing. I look forward to it. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for forging that invitation. Thank you for being my escort. The line that had begun their story, transformed by everything it now meant. Protection, partnership, choice, love. Outside, London slept. Inside, surrounded by books and botanical specimens, the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne planned their future, imperfect, unconventional, and entirely their own. And in the years that followed, they would welcome 3 beautiful children into Ashbourne House. First a daughter with her mother's intelligence and artistic precision, then twin sons who inherited their father's determination and their mother's courage. Each child would grow up watching their parents build something rare, a partnership of equals, a love that had been tested and proven, a family that chose authenticity over appearance. The Ashbourne legacy would be not wealth or title alone, but the example of 2 people who'd had the courage to forge their own path and the strength to walk it together. And so, dear listener, Beatrice Ashford, once invisible, once disgraced, once deemed unsuitable, became not just the Duchess of Ashbourne, but a woman who transformed what it meant to wear that title. She proved that courage isn't found in ballrooms, but in the choice to reach for something beyond what the world tells you is possible. She showed that love isn't about fitting into someone's world, but about building a new world together. And she discovered that sometimes the worst moment of your life, standing exposed before society's judgment, can become the doorway to everything you never dared to dream. If Beatrice's journey from obscurity to belonging touched your heart, if Maximilian's choice to defy convention for genuine partnership inspired you, if this story reminded you that bravery comes in many forms and that authenticity is worth more than acceptance, then please take a moment to like this video. Your like tells me these heartwarming historical romances resonate with you, and it helps others discover stories of courage and love. Subscribe to Lyra's Romance Stories. Join our community of dreamers who believe in second chances, unexpected love, and heroines who forge their own paths. New Victorian romance tales every week. Turn on notifications. Be the first to experience our next story of love against the odds, where ordinary women do extraordinary things. Comment below and tell me, which moment touched your heart most? Was it the forged invitation exposure, Maximilian's first "I am your escort," or their wedding vows? What would you have done in Beatrice's position? Should I write a sequel following their daughter's story? And if you loved Beatrice's transformation from invisible wallflower to confident duchess, you won't want to miss tomorrow's story. She was called the Spinster at 28 until a mysterious inheritance changed everything. A woman society had dismissed discovers that her late aunt's bequest comes with one shocking condition: she must marry within 6 months or lose everything. But when 5 very different suitors appear, each with secrets of their own, she realizes the real inheritance might not be money at all. Remember, dear listeners, you are never too poor, too old, too unconventional, or too scarred by the past to reach for love, for courage, for the life you deserve. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of bravery, one forged invitation, one extended hand, one choice to be seen rather than safe. Until next time, may you find the courage to crash your own ball, and may someone worthy be waiting to take your hand. This is Lyra, reminding you that every great love story begins with someone brave enough to step into the light. Sweet dreams, and see you in the next story.